to the, I guess, global investor track. This is called The Value of Education. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Han Hua. I hold no seats on any board this year for 2022. I will be your upcoming secretary for 2023. So thank you for joining us. We have a great session today. I want to give you a little bit of background on the people and the topic. I think one of the things that we all know and a common thread within our culture, Asian culture with the South Asian, Middle East, is we all believe in the value of education and how education is the way, is the way to improve not only yourself but your character, your personal development. And then personally for East Asian, a lot of our cultural community and our teachings and our beliefs come from Confucius. And Confucianism is like one of the first teacher scholars in 500 BCs. Google him, you can find out more information. But he really believed in the educatability and equality of all people. And he viewed education as a way of transformation, discovery, and just the cultivation of character. So you're probably wondering how is education related to real estate, but if you are agents, you know number one criteria when you're with buyers is this in a good school district, right? So we want to bring a more broader lens on how global and foreigners and abroad view education and real estate in the US market. So we have amazing panelists today. We're going to start with Ms. Jamie Tan. She is your current luxury committee chair and a top agent actually with Rodeo Realty in LA, and she has also been named at NER 30 Under 30. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about herself and her metro area. She's based in Los Angeles and what that entails in education. Then we have Mac Chin-Sun-Boon.
That's perfect.
He is a real estate broker with Coldwell Banker based in Boston. And Mac's background is really amazing because he was in consulting and iBanking, so he views real estate through that lens. And then our last panelist speaker is Gi-Fan Kim, who is originally from Philly but is now based in the New York area. And he is actually going through his master program for Georgetown in real estate. So, Jamie, you want to start a little bit about yourself and your market area?
Good morning, everyone. Oh, is this working or no?
Oh, yeah, turn it on.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamie Tian. I'm from Los Angeles. Los Angeles is very has a very wide range of clientele for sure. I graduated from UCLA, so I work with a lot of people who buy homes near UCLA for their students, USC as well, and then I also work with a lot of clients who actually buy homes for their kids to go to school in elementary school, middle school, and high school. So a lot of investors will come from overseas and buy homes in good school district areas in Los Angeles and also in Orange County as well. Irvine, you guys probably all have heard of Irvine. Chinese investors love to buy homes in Irvine because they have really good school districts. That's where I grew up as well, so yeah.
My name is Mac Chin-Sun-Boon, Coldwell-Banker. I live in Boston, service the Boston area. Though I'm actually originally from Denver, actually. I grew up here. So kind of like this coming home in some ways, right? But I actually ended up in Boston because I went to MIT. And I wasn't planning on staying there. I went off to London for a while and then came back. But I've been a real estate broker for almost 20 years now. So I've seen the ups and the downs and kind of the different things that happen there. And certainly, of course, you've got MIT and Harvard there, but you also have these other great schools, Boston University, Boston College, Northeastern, so really great schools, even though the kind of Massachusetts area has maybe 7 million people in total. A large majority of that is in the Boston metro area, so about 5 million, so that's about 2/3 of them. And I did an estimate of about, I'm not doing numbers, because we love numbers as Asians, right? So approximately 7 to 50% of those are student population, 80% undergraduates, 20% graduates. So that's about 310,000 people that are kind of in this market, right? Either they're renting, they're in dormitories, or their parents are buying things for them. And then if you kind of add to that the hospital network, because Harvard has a humongous teaching hospital network, which is Mass General Hospital, Dana-Farber, Brigham Women's, Children's Hospital. You add that into the equation, we're probably doubling that number at the very least. So huge amounts of people. You know, every time I talk to people, it's about kind of consulting with them, but I'm gonna come back to that in a little bit.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I'm Kifan Kim from New York City. Also, like she said, from Philadelphia as well. So a city like New York is kind of like a lot of other cities where there are people coming in for multiple reasons. But education definitely is a big part of it. I think wherever you're going. And I did go to NYU myself, so I kind of experienced it from being a student to then getting right into real estate and dealing with students and then their parents. But there's a lot of action, obviously, and a lot of interest based around the in my opinion, higher education community, because it's always a popular investment.
Yeah, so I actually went to school in Boston, so like the big joke was you literally turn around and there's a university or college everywhere. And there's about 35 college and university within the metro area, and that's not including all of the Wellesley and all of the little small New England liberal arts colleges around. And then, New York, you have Columbia, NYU, but I know we're talking a lot about the higher educations. What about, elementary school and grade school? I know with Boston, or outside of Boston, they're really known for their boarding schools. What about LA and New York?
I'm gonna let Jamie touch on that, because in the Manhattan market, I don't see much of the, early education. It's really more for locals and public schools, stuff like that. But I'll let Jamie talk.
Yeah, so I've had a lot of investors, specifically from China, that will buy homes in America, in Los Angeles or Orange County, for the purpose of their kids going to elementary school. They'll buy them sometimes as early as before their kids have started school, like when they're just born, and sometimes they'll lease it out, sometimes they'll leave it empty even. I've had a lot of clients who the husband works overseas, and they'll send the wife and the kid to come live in the home in America, and then the husband will come visit several times a year on breaks and holidays. But they obviously really value education because they're willing to separate their family and take that huge sacrifice for their family so that their kids can have a good education. So they really, really like Irvine, San Marino, Arcadia, Beverly Hills, wherever there's a good school district, good restaurants, good Chinese food, good grocery stores, same thing that everyone looks for, in a home, but number one criteria is always school, number two, safety, I think, and then number three is shopping and dining.
That's awesome. So, you touched upon it a little bit, but can you describe who your usual clientele that comes to you and want to buy a home in a particular school area? I know my cousin, so I'm Vietnamese American, I have a lot of family, but through my extended family, but one of the things that my aunt looked for when she was bringing my cousin over for a boarding school a little bit, or private, Christian education in the Bay Area right outside of San Jose. So we went and checked out a bunch of schools, and then eventually they did end up buying like a house in San Jose because the kids stayed, right? So tell me a little bit typical of who are your buyers? What, are they all crazy rich Asians, or are they just like saving up and then buying it that way?
Yeah. Well, just being Chinese myself, a lot of my clients are Chinese, these foreign investors are Chinese. I don't think that, obviously there's some very wealthy Chinese people that have loads of cash, but I don't think all of them are like that. I think they are a lot of them are very hardworking families, and they literally save everything they can to get their kids to come to school in America. It's like their goal in life. They just feel that the education is better here, they have more opportunities. My parents did the same thing. I moved to America when I was 5 years old. My parents moved to America 2 years prior and left me in China with my grandparents. They came early they were working on their PhDs, and they wanted to get settled and get everything settled before I came, but their only goal was basically to get to America so that I could grow up in America and have a good education here. So I think, it's like the American dream,
Matt?
I would echo all of those things. I think Boston, like many of these metro areas, we have a tier of buyer and seller in pretty much every tier, from the ultra luxury to the kind of middle, kind of high end and the kind of middle class, and then certainly in the lower end where they've scraped every penny just to get to America somehow, right? And my parents, they came over also to kind of do school, so it's all really relevant. And I was only one when my parents came over, and you remember that lifestyle, right? In some ways, right? It really kind of forged that mentality of working hard and doing what you do. So when we talk to these parents, right, we can kind of understand where they're coming from, and we tell them that, hey, we've been there, we've done that, and I understand what you do. And money is important, obviously, right? It's no object, so we will be frugal as we can. But we always come down to, it's always the metrics, right? It's the numbers, right? It's the economy. So I always come down, break down the economy. How does the economy affect the market here in the Boston area, for instance, right? It's the job market, and even during the pandemic, right? The economy changed so much, right? Some areas really faltered, and other areas did really, really well. In fact, I think the pandemic actually helped the Boston area in so many ways. Moderna and pharma and biotech and cloud computing just exploding, that really kind of activated our market like all these markets have done.
I do want to disclose actually, like a lot of the clients I work with are not international. The ones even valuing education as well are local. They're very. It's not just a cultural thing. Everyone understands education is it's the great equalizer, right? And at this point, I like to point that out because it's. Alright, so in our city we have condos and co-ops, and I think that there's different markets for each where locals can have an advantage getting into co-ops because international foreign buyers cannot, oftentimes. So when you get talking about international investors for this, it is pretty much pretty heavy pockets. And it's just my experience in New York, just because they're saying I have to come in and compete. I can't get this product, I can only get this product, which I'm competing with a bunch of other people now, even in the city, in the States. And a lot of them are cash buyers, so they just come in and drop their money. I did primarily deal with a lot of Koreans as well, because I'm Korean. I know you guys have different experiences with other cultures, but they didn't really, it was mainly cash buyers. They came in and said, I see the investment, I want to get it now, and I'll pop out money. That's basically it.
Sounds really ideal.
It's not bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I went to school at Boston University, and I think we know that real estate is a great way to build generational wealth, but also to pass on generational wealth, right? So when I was working at one of the big Boston law firms, the partners, what they did was, I think his kid went to Tufts University in Cambridge, so they ended up just buying a house or a condo, and then, one of the his daughter, his son lives there, and then they rented out the other rooms to cover their mortgage. So you're basically, again, not only a great investment, but it's also cash flowing. That's one way of doing it. So, that's obviously their criteria where they were looking for that was near the university, like you said, there's these certain things. Besides that, is there anything else that these buyers are looking for, whether they're international or local, when they're looking at these properties in these districts or school?
I think you're right about the kind of cash flow. I'm also an investor as well too, right? And there's some people that don't like obviously there's the term student housing, right? And some people don't like that. They think, oh, we don't want undergraduates, we don't want these students and so on. I actually really love them because they have a co-signer, right? And that co-signer will just pay no matter what, right? And that's the best thing. But really it comes down to, and some of the parents that come, right, they don't really think about the investment until maybe they start looking at leases, wow, it's $3,000 for a 1 bedroom, it's maybe I should buy something instead. Or they've gone through those 4 years of undergraduate and they rented the entire time, oh my God, what a waste, right? And then they look at prices now, but then they get introduced to the fact that Hello's saying how these students are kind of sharing the rooms, they're renting out by room. I have one investor, actually he started with the Tufts, and he only invests in stuff around Tufts University. And he actually never steps foot in them. I just go and videotape it for him and he'll buy it, right? And so, but he knows that inventory really well, and that's how he kind of rents it on. That's his thing.
I'll do it real quick. what they're looking for from ease of maintenance. They're not here, and unless you have someone like on the ground to do the legwork, which we oftentimes do, but at the end of the day, they just want something that's clean, simple to manage, and collect your money.
Yeah, I think just being next to the university itself inherently makes it a good investment. So a lot of parents, I've even had parents buy it before their kids are going to college with hopes that their kids will go to UCLA one day, and they're like, even if they don't, I can still rent it out to other students and it should still be a good investment anyway. And the type of properties they buy, I think it really ranges. Some people, they just want to buy a very, very basic one-bedroom, condo that their kids can live in. And sometimes they'll even have one person live in the living room and one person in the bedroom, and they'll split it up. But I've also seen investors buy homes next to UCLA. There's one side of UCLA is all condos, the other side is mansions. They bought a 3,000-4,000 square foot home, and one of their kids lived in one, the master bedroom, and then they rented out all the other rooms, and they made a ton of money, doing it that. So, I mean, the rent, when you rent out, each room of the house to a different person, you can get way more total rent than if you were to rent out the whole house to a family. So I think that's something interesting that investors think about too.
I think that's also the trend now with short-term rentals, or another way of how you can maximize the profits or the value of a home is student housing is such a bad term, but it's not necessarily a bad term, because like Jamie said, if you divvy it up and just rent by room, you actually maximize, and it's gonna be much more rental income, than if you had long-term rental, just one property to one person.
Right.
So, but if you're doing, and if we were all in college once, you just come with college problems, and if there's any kind of breakdown, they'll definitely call you right away to go and fix things. And I think, you just want to be cognizant of that when you do purchase homes around university and colleges. I think the next, one of the other questions is, besides colleges, at what stage, and you've touched upon it, do parents buy? I know when I was taking real estate classes, or just any of these masterminds, they're go ahead, if you're gonna have a kid, get that down payment, buy a house, because by the time the kid is 18 and ready to go to college, that house basically pays for the education, because that's one way of, creating wealth. But, and then also with the UC system that is very competitive to get in, when do people buy into that in your market, Jamie?
Yeah, I think you have to have 1 full year of permanent residence, I believe, before you can qualify for the lower tuition, and it's significant. It's half compared to the out-of-state tuition and the foreign national tuition. So people will sometimes buy a property in advance and try to establish that residency, and you'll save a lot of money. You could probably pay for the down payment using the money you saved from tuition.
In terms of kind of when, we touched upon this already, boarding schools are really popular, so kind of at that stage. And there's also high school, certainly, of course. Boston Latin is one of the kind of top high schools in the nation. And even people that are locally, they don't live in Boston, but you have to live in Boston to go to Boston Latin. So some of them will actually rent a place in Boston to apply for Boston Latin, just in case they get in. And then maybe if they get in, then they'll buy a place after that, for instance. So there's kind of that goes on as well.
High school definitely is the age I've seen most common, but I think we all have stories here where, because we're always asking, about the profile of the children, etc. And there have been times when, this guy's daughter was 4 years old, I think, and I'm like, dude, okay. It doesn't matter if what happens in 15 years, it's going to be a good investment, right? So the whole thing is they think early, and it's just like Jamie said, if this child does not go to Harvard, does not go to NYU, does not go to the school, then hey, my fallback is that I can still rent it out, because there's other students, a ton of other students who are going to want to rent this or buy it, right? I want to take a quick tangent though, sorry. How many people in here are investors? And how many are brokers? Oh man, more investors than brokers, all right. So, all right, if we're talking about that, we'll love to talk to you guys afterwards too, because curious to know, from the investor standpoint, I guess going forward, I'm sorry to take a tangent. But going forward, I'm just thinking out loud here is that, the past couple of years, obviously for many reasons, COVID especially, all the cities and all the markets, especially New York, they really hit hard. And the question right now is all about virtual learning, just like the office is virtual work, and how is that going to affect the back to office, back to school kind of thing? Is it going to be the same? Are we going to look at the same numbers? Is this data going to be relevant this year versus historically? But that's a big question. I kind of wonder is like. Oh, you also mentioned I'm back in grad school. It took a long time for me to finally pull the trigger. A big reason is the physical constraints of not being able to go and the time you're working and all this bullshit. Excuse me, but during this time, during the COVID period, Georgetown made it virtual. They basically went all the courses are virtual. I said, this is fantastic. This is the reason I can go to school. And right now, like this semester, they're doing the hybrid transition out of it. So they're trying to get it all back in person. And I know a lot of it has to do with the housing. Their dorms are empty, but the student, the population is actually pushing for more virtual again to keep it a little bit more. Just like if you talk to your friends about back to office kind of stuff, there's some companies and offices that are pushing them to come back in. They're kind of even forcing them. And then some of them are like, look, if you can work from home, if you can get your job done, I don't care where you are. They're like, you can work from the Bahamas if you want to, I don't care. So it's kind of interesting to see where the future of the impact of this is going to go in correlation to the education as well.
Well, I mean, I think if you all remember MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses, what was that one big website that's now
OpenCourseWare?
Yeah, OpenCourse, which I took some classes on because it was easy and virtual, and we're all moving towards that, so to speak. And I think at one point we, some friends and I talked about, is brick and mortar school really necessary to go to school and learn, or is it all virtual? And I used to think, because I was in Boston right after the last recession, and one of the saving grace for Boston and its economy was the college and the universities, because during recessions, a lot of people end up going back to school to learn a new skill or a new trade, right? So Boston's market never really dipped down that much. So I'm wondering if the pandemic did any of that, because everything went virtual and all the dorms and all the student work back on campus. And you were saying, Matt, how half of the population, are students in Boston.
I think the pandemic kind of negatively affected the real estate market around the schools a little bit, actually. Personally, for me in Los Angeles, the rentals in Westwood, which is where UCLA is located, the rentals and the prices didn't really come down for the purchase price, but all the rental prices came down a few $100s. Some of them maybe up to like $500 a month, because obviously the students weren't at school. So for like most of 2020, it was pretty kind of hard to rent out your place around that area, because there's just no one there. But then starting in 2021, the students started coming back, and now it's, even though they're doing kind of like mixed virtual, in-person learning, a lot of students want to be back to socialize. And like my sister is in college right now, she goes to Yale, and I kind of feel bad for her, because her first year at college, she had her first half of her first year, she had the normal college experience, fun in the dorms, all of that. She came home for spring break and then didn't get to go back. And then, she stayed home with my parents for like a year doing virtual learning. It was so depressing for her, it wasn't fun, obviously. Finally, she moved back to the dorms and they're back, but it's still very limited for them. She has to test 2 times a week, they don't have cafeterias, everything's virtual except for labs. I think I feel like people need human interaction, and especially at that college age, it's about the relationships, and I think that's what you kind of take away from it. So it's important, I think.
If I can also add to that, we had the same kind of dip in 2020, certainly when the students were gone. I certainly had several contracts under agreement with the pandemic, and those investors were like, oh, we need to should we pull out? No, we're not gonna pull it out. We're gonna close. This is a great time. Certainly, of course, they suffered, but there was also a market there, which I'm sure also there's in other markets, is the medical market, right? That really never disappeared, right? Because obviously medicine, doctors that come in, you have to be on site, and they were in high demand, obviously. So, one of the secrets obviously that we all know is timing, right? Our market revolves around the rental market, and it's a September 1st cycle. So that's September 1st is when it starts, August 31st is when it ends. And then the medical residency cycle is the June-July cycle. That's when the residents, they kind of get to know when they're going during this time right now. In fact, we're getting WhatsApp calls and stuff from parents already. And then they come into the June-July cycle. So that was always really strong. So this goes back to the demographic question of, kind of what's sustaining in the market and where we are. We've got lots of higher education, lots of graduate students. We've got a ton of graduate students. Many markets mostly have undergrads. We have a lot of graduate students just because of the government funding that we get.
Where I was going to start here. There's a lot to say, man.
You can start anywhere.
In terms of the importance of in-person, 100% I agree with that. Even if I do prefer the virtual now, just as I'm later in my life and everything, but there's no replacement to, even I still crave actually meeting my classmates, meeting my professors in person, and getting that relationship and building those future paths. But at the end of the day, one thing that I would try to keep in mind is I'm trying to stay cool with technology, which is really hard to follow. But there's so much going on in the technology world. The metaverse is this another panel later on, but it's crazy. I used to work for EXP. If you guys are familiar with EXP at all, one of the big things is their real estate tech, which is AREAA. AREAA is their online campus. It is a phenomenal platform that I think even Harvard and Yale uses it, and U.S. military and all these companies use it because it's the next best thing. You're talking about interacting with the little avatars and everything like that, but it still doesn't replace that interaction. There's always going to be a market for what we're talking about here, around the education, around that sector. I just think that technology might be tempering the future growth of it a bit, if that makes sense, because maybe it might add to it. There might be more people now, able to go to school and then all of a sudden thinking that they're going to go in person now too, so who knows? I'm just kind of literally thinking out loud here and saying, I know we have a lot of past experiences and trends that we've seen, but the newest one, in my opinion, I think we have to keep in mind is the technology. It's not just Zoom. There's things that are really going on in a few years, I think will kind of rock our worlds.
If I could actually add to this technology a little bit too, in that
it's not a tech panel, sorry.
but it's but you're right though. It's immersive. Certainly, obviously, during the pandemic, our international students, right? Those were on student visas, right? International student visas, they had a hard time, right? Could they stay? Did they have to leave because they're not on campus anymore? So that was obviously a huge issue. And especially, obviously, we know, right? When English is not your primary language or your second language, if you're not in person, it's really hard to learn, right? If you're just looking at the screen all the time, it's going to be really hard to absorb this information, especially the highly technical information. It's going to be really hard. So I think certainly technology is a play, but I think there needs to be kind of a fine balance of some sort of in-person technology, something.
So then it seems like just like work,
Where everything is becoming a hybrid of work from home, or you're in the office every other day, or just Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. School or education is becoming more like that. It's actually Coursera was the website that was one of the big first massive open online courses. So then, if we are thinking ahead, and we're thinking about the trends of both, you need a social aspect. Learn whether that's labs, if you're in the skills type of major. What advice would you give then for prospective buyers or investors that are looking at buying near, whether that's grade school, high school, or college? Is it still the same advice that's like, somebody's always going to rent this because it's near the university? Or is it more of like, maybe you should think about, bigger space so that you have more soundproofing or whatever when you do virtual schools?
I don't think there's certain, there's just we have like luxury brand names or whatever, right? Like Louis Vuitton or whatever it is, Mercedes-Benz. Harvard's not going anywhere. The appeal for Ivy League schools and higher education, the U.S. is by far the leading country in the world with that attraction. So to say that all of it's gonna kind of, no longer be of interest is complete bullshit. You're gonna have a lot. I think it's gonna be more of private schools. I don't know I know there's a lot of nuances to the California stuff. and each stages are very different. So in my market, I think it's really going to be buckled down to NYU and Columbia. It comes down to that because some of the other universities, it doesn't matter. You know, if it was kind of like before virtual, it was like okay. Now virtual's like I don't know. You know, it's
Actually, if I add to that, actually, so I got this WhatsApp, text last week, right? So parents, the daughter's coming to MIT for undergraduate. She's looking at rents, right? She's texting me, or she's sending me a message from Singapore, right? And then, I gave her some numbers. She's like, well, what if how about this one that's 500,000? Oh, that's like 20 miles out. You want to be that far away, or an undergraduate, you want to be close to the campus, right? And then, I give her that data, and then, a couple days later, then she started sending me information about the flood zone, right? All of a sudden, right? It's like, yeah, well, that's all of Boston, right? So now then, do you not want your child to go to MIT? Because maybe if you're worried about that, you should, maybe that's what you can say. Like, no, she's going there, right? So, well, okay, then it's everywhere here, right? So that's just one of those things. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I don't think the advice to them would be any different, really. I think when they're looking for a property, they want to be obviously, like they said, close to the campus. Most students don't have cars, so they want to be able to walk to school fairly quickly, be able to walk to eat, get groceries, all of that. I think that you mentioned, are they looking for soundproofing, things like that? That is an interesting point, because I think doing school from Zoom can be hard for some people depending on their living situation, right? Not everyone has their own room or their own private space that they can do Zoom learning without distractions. So I think that's the problem too, is you've all been on Zoom meeting where the kids screaming in the back, the dogs bark, things like that. There's a lot of distractions at home. So not everyone has the ability to have the same education at home. I don't know, it changes.
So,
Well, I'm going to jump off of what Max said with the medical schedule. So I actually had my client last year, their child was coming. So I'm based in the Gulf Coast of Alabama. University of South Alabama had the medical school, so she was coming to do her not residency, her grad school there. So they looked at both renting versus buying, and the daughter, because she's in school, she wanted something because 2 years of it is in person on the campus, and then 2 years of it is by the medical campus, right, or where the hospital is, and they're in 2 different locations. So we ended up pinpointing basically a halfway point for her commute. But she was also very adamant that she wanted something low maintenance. So we ended up with a townhouse with a pool and everything. So if she had to do classes, virtual classes, she can at least look at the pool and it's nice and sunny, or she can go out and, take classes at the pool. So I'm just wondering, I guess, if then the trend for building or for rehabbing something, because a lot of these universities have been around for so long, right? Going to school in Harvard, parking around Harvard Square sucks, big time, because there is no parking, so it's just best. So are these buildings, or we have an aging stock of housing, right? Will this be converted into more modernized soundproofing or more, and there is a current session going on about resort lifestyle, more geared towards that, because I remember when I was in school, our student housing became really bougie with the nice amenities and everything. So I'm wondering if the further trends would be just to buy, not only close to campus is number one because you're there to attend school, but whether these additional amenities and things like that will be the new trend. And then whether there will be schooling on the metaverse or Sandbox. Is anybody investing in real estate in the metaverse or Sandbox? Wow, you're on the edge of technology. We could hopefully have a session about that at National Convention. But the other thing that I wanted to touch upon is how are they financing all this? Is it through non-QM loans? Is it all cash? Is it group of a family pulling together financing? How are they buying these property?
Certainly with the cash buyers, everybody talks about the crazy rich Asians, right? So we certainly have those. And then we also have the ones where, they've got the money, maybe they don't want to bring it all over, so okay, what are the financing options, right? And usually you can get a finance with 50% down, right? Most any bank will pretty much do that with no credit score, right? 50% down. These portfolio loans. So that, and in fact, we even have a term, and you may even have the same term. It's called a kitty condo, right? It's the kitty condo mortgage, and that's what a lot of people like I call it mortgage, right? You know, I've got a kitty condo for you, right? And you know, and then she knows exactly what to do with that, right? And that's they'll finance it that way in many ways.
I didn't have too much experience with but fortunately not needing financing. I think it was also the competitive nature that they kind of wanted to win it and just make sure they got it without having to jump through the hoops. Particularly if we're talking about foreign, and because I dealt with more Koreans, I'm not going to try to get political because this is not really that place for it, but it's relevant because the presidential elections in South Korea just happened last month, and that was a big part of that election was based around the real estate agreement. So not to get into the details there, but there were if you have certain clients in certain countries or certain follow what's happening there, the politics, their policies, things that are going to affect their mindset from their side, and why they're going to start moving their money around, whether they for one reason or another. They could say it's education, but it might be something else. I just went on it. I just forgot my train of thought, but I just wanted to point that out there.
There are certainly buyers who get loans and qualify for financing. Like he said, they usually require a larger down payment before for national loans. If you go through like some of these foreign banks like HSBC or East and West Bank, you're able to find programs that will fit your client's needs. But I think the majority of them do buy in cash. From China, it's very difficult to get your cash over to the United States. Each person can only transfer like $50,000 per year. So they have to prepare many years in advance and start sending the money here. And sometimes they'll use like family members, friends, like each person sends them 50,000. They have to accumulate the money to get enough to buy the house. And so it's a struggle. I think it's difficult, but like that's something interesting to say is that like they're buying the house so far in advance for their kids, and then they have to even plan even farther in advance to get the money here. It's crazy. And like in China, and I'm sure in many other Asian countries as well, the government owns all the land, so all properties on a land lease. So you can't build as much like generational wealth per se. You can't really expect to pass this property on forever because the government can just take it away. So I think that's why they especially want to buy in the United States, because it's a way to kind of park their money, invest, get their kids a good education and all of that.
If I can actually add one more thing about the political things. It's not political, but basically we do have to be aware of the political situations around the world, right? Because the transfer of money is really very political, right? And this is why kind of cryptocurrencies is kind of like in the news. But like I had a deal, this is before the Hong Kong uprising, right? Where he was moving some money over. We were actually going to buy a large apartment complex for $13 million. So I had it under agreement, it was all ready to go, and all of a sudden this Hong Kong uprising happened. He said, I gotta scale back. Even though when he was already in Hong Kong, right? It's just that visibility of transferring that much money over here would just be too much visibility for them. So unfortunately that deal that, but we have to be aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, I know like in,
Vancouver, Canada, when there was a lot of foreign investor, the government itself, the Canadian government and the British government started restricting on who could buy and how that money moves or transfers. So if you are working with global investors, always be cognizant of what the current political situation is here in the US and abroad, because that does affect the movement of money. It's affected by political situations. Hence, Ukraine, Russia can't really move your money if you're Russian. So we're gonna open it up to Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Questions, comments, concern?
Extra credit points for questions.
While you guys are thinking, for those of you who are still here, I'll drop a little secret that I used to do, still kind of do. So again, since I went to NYU, I had my ins here, so I built my relationships here. NYU also happens to be one of the largest lenders in Manhattan. So they're constantly, buying properties. Big reason is for faculty, big reason is for students. And in the past, it definitely gave me a little insight as to how they're seeing it on their side. From the inside of the business, saying, hey, we need more housing. I see 3 more buildings that they're buying, this much more square feet that they're planning on building, this and this. This gives me indications where I can go to my investors and comfortably say to them, look, this is happening in the pipeline. You're buying something right now. It's pretty good, right? I'm still waiting on some numbers for this year, actually, because I'm very curious to see what NY's approach is in the next couple of years. But I think if you have the opportunity to get into, get some of those numbers, and even if it's when I was looking at the Columbia area, I couldn't get that information as readily available. So what I would do is look at construction starts in the area, and you can kind of get an idea with the pipeline. You know, there's some multifamily, there's some offices, but then there's some of them you can tell are for student housing. So all these kind of things for me, looking at the pipeline of construction, obviously these developers are doing their own need, their analysis too, and making sure that this is going to get built. There's a need for this, right? The need is a big thing. So if you're able to find that, I guess, the data ahead of time, which in my opinion, the earliest data is either construction starts or information from the board or something like that, then you're getting a good, you're getting like market data a year ahead. And that's something your investors are gonna really love about if you happen to have, you know, the proper knowledge of that. So if you're able to, I'd say go that route, and you can get a good idea of where they're thinking housing is needed.
Let me add something about thinking about aging housing stock. Obviously, you know, Boston is a really old city, and you know, the stuff around Harvard and MIT and all the schools really are really aging housing stock. But it's really not improving much. You know, we've got some new construction, but land is at a premium for sure, right? It's really small. And certainly the new, you know, the Asian buyers that are coming in, you know, there are some people certainly that want the brownstones, they want the old, you know, New England feel, but almost always the Asians always come in, I want new,
Yep.
right? You want paid, I want new, and we paid up for it, right? It's almost that way, right? We don't want to live in the basement, we want to be up high, right? We want these views, right? So it's really that standard. Also, let me just add to that, Cambridge, you know, this is how kind of university housing really affects real estate in many ways. Cambridge has actually the lowest residential real estate rate in all of Massachusetts, only like 0.5%. And part of the reason is why is because MIT and Harvard own a large swath of that inventory, right? And they don't buy it only as just Harvard and MIT, like they have all these other sub-companies that buy real estate, right? And even though they're a nonprofit, they don't actually really pay taxes, but they upkeep around there, and so therefore it's less upkeep that the city has to do, and that's how real estate taxes stay low.
Go ahead.
Another type of actually housing that I've seen lately is I've seen like retired folks. They'll like rent out rooms of their house to foreign students, sometimes high school foreign exchange students or college students, and they'll take a monthly rental and they'll actually cook for them and take care of them and provide meals for them and things like that. And it's a way for them to kind of, you know, make money from their extra rooms and then also just like have people around, and you know, it's kind of interesting. I've been starting to see that a little bit more lately as well.
Yeah, I read an article about that.
For Boston anyway, it's like a lot of these boomers and what is it, the silent generations, my bad, sorry for all the boomers in here. You're empty nesters, so you have extra rooms, right? So you know, you're empty nester, retired, extra rooms. A lot of people are turning into, like, I have my rooms, it's close to the university or close to a school. Why not make money and make income by renting it out? Obviously, do your due diligence, but I'm starting to see that trend. And you know, I went to BU, and the joke for Boston University was we basically ended up buying all the hotels that were on campus at one point. Like, there's a dorm on 575 Commonwealth Avenue that was Howard Johnson before. We call it the Hojo, but it got turned into student housing. So that's, you know, besides looking at tracks of that, and then BU also got the city to extend their city limit so that we could be inside the Boston city limits.
Interesting.
Yeah, so universities are super powerful, and they buy it under subsidiary. So just always take a look out for that. I live in Alabama, but private school is becoming big, and so I would describe where I live. So I live in Mobile, so I'm based in the Gulf Coast, Mobile. Mobile is in San Francisco. The county I live in is Marin County. So it's very bougie and, you know, demographically more well off. So we're getting more private schools, like at Christian schools. So they already scouted out a site that used to be farmland, and they already have a sign up that says future home of Bayshore Academy or whatever. And then our Catholic school, St. Michael's, Phillips Rivers, who was the LA quarterback, right? Was that? What?
Philip Rivers.
Philip Rivers, sorry. He's actually our high school football coach at our Catholic high school, Catholic school, which is, you know, 1st to 12th grade. But I think that's another trend to follow is what is your, you know, private school in your area doing, or what is the great public school, are they expanding? Those are things and insight I think you should look for if you want to stay ahead of the trend and want to become part of the market where you're selling to people that are interested in good neighborhoods or good school districts. Questions?
What are your thoughts on public versus private in elementary and college? So, because I know different neighborhoods command different prices. Obviously, the best public school neighborhoods have higher prices for the homes, and then if you like want to move to like a less rated school district, you get a better price cut on the house, but then you have to send your kids to private school, which is like $100,000 or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, that's actually a really good question, actually. So we've got like the downtown Boston market, right, which is usually generally single people. Maybe they just got married and they're having a kid, and of course the pandemic kind of pushed that. They kind of moved out to the suburbs sooner than they would have. But it always comes down to, well, do we buy a bigger place in Boston and go to a private school? And of course, you're paying private school, which is almost like another college tuition, right? Or do you actually then maybe pay the equivalent amount, say in Brookline, which is the next town over, which has some great schools that people love to go to, but you go to public school there. So then you look at the investments, like, okay, maybe your real estate is appreciating, and certainly your child's education will appreciate as well too, but maybe not the same as your real estate. So do you put that into your home instead and then go to a public school? Could be just as good. So we have that discussion a lot with clients.
I think a lot of clients have a preference for like private versus public. I find that foreign nationals, they really do like private school and they have that preference. I think private school, I mean, there's a reason that it costs more. The children are gonna get more one-on-one attention and all of that, and it's just a different experience. Like I went to UCLA, and when I talked to my sister about her experience at Yale, it's night and day. I mean, like I had 300-400 students in my first year classes. I never met the professor, I didn't even go to half the classes because I couldn't see anything. What's going on? The room is so big, I can't hear anything. She never had that. It was 50 students max for her biggest GE classes. She knows all her professors. They talk after class. They have mixers. School funds all these events. School gives them money to have mixers, do all this stuff, and it's a total different experience. So I think if people can afford the private school, it's kind of there's always an advantage for it for sure. They have, the schools have more resources, they have more laptops, technology for the kids, all of that. But it comes down to funding, I think.
Let me actually add to that too. I think there's different levels of public school for sure. Brookline Public School, for instance, is very much like a private school in most other towns. So you get the same kind of benefits and budget that these other schools have. So I think it really comes down to perspective and level up.
Yeah, what they said. So. One thing I'll say is that for the early education, I don't see private schools being more valuable than public school, private versus public. Like you mentioned, it's case by case. But in the higher education level, I think you're right. Foreign investors are definitely looking at the private schools. There's different value there.
It kind of goes down to that talk actually this morning with Barron's guy, right? Veblen, right? The more expensive it is, the more somebody kind of wants it in some ways. And universities are in many ways for Asians that way. The more expensive it is, it's got to be better, right? Somehow, right?
Isn't it easier to get into private school versus public?
Is it easier to get into private versus
Depends on the
public?
school. Depends on the school.
Yeah, depends on the school.
Yeah, because public school, you have to do a lot of forms and a lot of, you have to fill.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for public school, for sure. And of course, it's by where you live. So there is that for sure.
There's also, I think the reason it's easier to get in is because public schools have limits on how many foreign nationals they can accept. So UC system has to accept a certain amount of California students and whatnot. So private schools, they have more flexibility to take the foreign national students.
Also, they can make more money.
Also, they can make more money because they charge more tuition, yeah, exactly. And then I just thought of like earlier when you were asking like at what point do they come, I think my clients, like when I talk to my clients, they want their kids to come as early as feasible and possible. Like, because they know that like if the kids come in elementary school, they're gonna be assimilated really well, their English will be good. You know, once you get to middle school, high school, if you come then your English, you're gonna have accent, and they know that their kids aren't gonna have the same opportunities when they graduate and like, you know, not be able to find as good a job or whatnot. So they want their kids to come as early as possible so that they can experience the full American lifestyle and just get assimilated.
I mean, isn't it easier to get into colleges if they come in junior high and get into the high school, and so much easier to?
Exactly, yeah, and it'll be easier to go to college as well, because applying from overseas, you don't know what's going on, you don't have the network around you, you know.
And it's hard.
And it's hard to get in, exactly.
Actually, I think it also really depends too, though, on, I mean, there are certain, you know, quotas. I mean, universities probably don't want you to say that, right? For instance, so, like for instance, for MIT, I know that for the graduate school program, right, they had a certain number, and I don't know what it's being published, but certain number of like students from like Thailand or Korea or so on that they wanted to kind of get into the program. So in some ways, you might have less competition because you're only fighting against a smaller pool versus the US pool, which is much larger. Like you might be of, say, Thai ethnicity, but you're not actually coming from Thailand at this time.
I mean, I used that to my advantage when I went to school in Boston. I applied to the engineering program. I was Asian from Alabama. Like, that was pretty, I used the statistic to my advantage. And with MIT, I did an odd job when I was in college of like organizing all the different foreign national applicants and by which country they were from. It was amazing how many people applied to MIT and the acceptance rate. I mean, I think, like Jamie said, with public university, there's certain quotas they have to meet of you know, in-state tuition, in-state applicants versus, you know, private university. And then I know like some private schools, there's feeder high school, so to speak, where they come and recruit at certain high school. So I know some parents that have like aim of whether that is like the Ivy League or small liberal arts college in the South or the West or Pacific Northwest, really also look at which high school their kids should go to or want to attend because it's a feeder school into the university. Any other questions? We have time.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Cora Holbrook, and I'm from Guaranteed Rate from Boston. So I just have one comment and a question. So the first one, as a comment on the aging units in Boston, there is a regulation to maintain the historical value of the buildings there, and that is what defines Boston. So it has to look old. But certainly, because Boston is a rich, and it's already gentrified, like San Francisco, Los Angeles, it's already gentrified, right? So, but that doesn't prevent the unit owners or the building owners to renovate. Maybe there are some small buildings around Chinatown because the owners are old school. but because the owners of these buildings are money, so the buildings are mostly updated. And especially in Cambridge too, if you've walked around Cambridge, and I recently have, about a year or so, I recently financed a Cambridge single family, one of the very few single families in Cambridge. And they bought it and renovated the entire building. But anyway, going to my question, it's about the pricing. I've listened to your contention about parents buying for the children, but how is it now with the rising prices of, especially in cities like Boston and LA and San Francisco especially, that has been gentrified? How are parents still, and then most children are also schooled from home, and so how does that affect the investing mood of parents to buy properties for their children?
I think it's still the same In fact, with rising prices, it's even harder for their children. Let's say they graduate, right, to buy something on their own. It's just so much harder as it is. Whereas these, the boomers, right, they've got money saved up. So the boomers are not like grandparents, right, grandparents, right, they then kind of donate some money as down payment to the Gen X children, right? This whole multi-generational kind of donation process of getting in. So they may actually have to ask the grandparents now for some additional assistance, but I think that they are still on that track of still buying, or whatever might be the original track was, it still is today. And even with rising interest rates, for some people it doesn't matter because they're paying cash anyway, or they're borrowing so little that it doesn't matter as well too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the same because as the prices go up, the rentals go up too. And like near UCLA, it's literally like $2,500 to $3,000 for like a nice 1-bedroom. And then like you can maybe find something for like in the $2,200 to $2,300 range. But think about like, it adds up after 4 years, and the dorms are even more expensive. It's crazy how expensive the dorms are. So I mean, investment-wise, if the family can afford it, I think it's still in their mindset. And all the students want to go back. So I mean, they want to be around campus, and I think the parents understand that. So I think their mindset is still there. Yeah.
When the pricing goes up, this is when the parents tell the children, you need to get that scholarship. Yeah, but like she said, everything's relative. If the prices are going up, the rent's usually going up as well. So.
Okay, we have like 5 more minutes left. Any other questions?
I don't need the mic. So, back to the original assertion about the communities valuing education and moving here when their children are young. I mean, it's easy to find out information about what universities are prestigious and which ones have great reputations. So if I'm a broker and I'm wanting to target my advertising, my marketing towards people that might want to come to the U.S. And I know that I'm targeting a community that likes numbers, not just my opinion. What resources are there to validate that school A is better than school B in like the local public schools or the local private, elementary, middle school, high schools, to help, solidify my argument with those families coming in. Like I said, colleges are easy, but somebody who's moving here from Bangkok, how are they going to know that I'm from the Denver area? How are they going to know that just because my opinion is that school district A is better than school district B? What are the resources for that?
Well, there's a lot of ranking systems online, like greatschools.com, and like even when you're on Zillow, if you scroll down, it shows the assigned schools and what the ratings are and whatnot. So I think the buyers are very well educated and they're able to find that information online. And also, I think a lot of buyers, just by word of mouth too, like they're all talking to each other. Like a lot of times Chinese buyers will call me and they know like they want their kids to go to Harvard Westlake. Harvard Westlake is like the premier private school in Los Angeles that like it's impossible to get in, and you have to like make a donation to the foundation to even get in. You have to like donate a wing to the school or something because the waiting list is so long. And everyone, like all these parents, they're like obsessed with it. They research all day online. They know about all these websites. They're able to find that information. So I think they're very well educated.
Oh, may I comment on that, please?
Yeah.
Isn't that what these actresses put them in trouble, that those donations to the schools?
Yeah.
Isn't that what put them in trouble?
Varsity Blues.
Shouldn't there be? I think a lot of public schools are still very objective in the way they accept students. And those minded people, I think, shouldn't that be gone already?
It should, yeah.
But they like
But they're private, so they can do whatever they want.
So for public schools, just check the school system, the testing from the states. Most state has to make their kids all take different tests to see how well the school is doing. But for high school, the number one thing is talk to counselors, because they're more than happy to always advertise how well their kids are doing, or how much scholarships the kids gotten, or what university the kids are enrolling in. I actually went to public grade school all my life. One of the middle school I attended was a magnet school, so it was very much almost like a private school. We had school uniforms, but you had to be in the lottery and all that. So I think if you just contact your school system, they definitely can either give you data or numbers, or just contact the school itself.
So I was gonna say something similar to that. So I'm not a early education guy, but just kind of thinking is that if you work backwards, it might help. You know, so for instance, I'm being kind of originally from Philly. I went to school there when I was young. UPenn is obviously a pretty prominent school in Philadelphia. And if you look at the statistics, and this might not be a public data thing that you can kind of pull out from, but it's stronger than just an opinion. You can see like which schools, like you said, feeder schools, which schools are the ones that are generally having the most students come from. Or you can work it from the high school end. I went to Central High School, which was very a magnet school as well. And some schools boast about, hey, we had 28 of our graduates this year go to Harvard. We had 14 got accepted to, you know, whatever, this and that. These are soft data points that you can get from them. And they trickle it down. Where does this high school get your students from? Oh, there's some middle schools or some grade schools here that are fantastic. We pulled them from here. The testing, you know, well, a lot of times they'll test them and they say, well, high percentage of students from this school pass. And you're kind of seeing the trickle down of quality, where they're kind of pulling, and it all goes up. But it's a long way of doing it, but it might be the only way if you're really looking for it.
Let me add to this about feeder schools, right? I mean, some of these schools really have, they have lineages. They have lines of feeders that go from certain countries, for instance, or certain kind of demographic, for instance, I'll give you an example. My husband's actually here, he's actually videoing me here. He actually went to Tabor Academy, which is in the Boston area, which is actually a feeder school to a lot of the military academies. So he went to West Point, for instance. So that's a feeder school. But then some of his classmates, or this is one of his classmates, he actually lives in Thailand now, this big white guy, right? And he was just saying, he had these Thai students that were international students that were classmates. We were these skinny little students, right? Little did he know, because he lives in Thailand now, that these people actually came from these really wealthy families. They own islands, and so he's really in touch with them now, right? But just to illustrate, right? These are feeder schools that come. They just have a lineage of people that just keep feeding in, and they're very successful at it, right? They're good at it.
Julie, did you have a question?
I just wanted to mention to everyone that we're talking about elite schools, right? Top schools. But I wanted to let everyone know there are people, foreigners, that are that have students that are not, in that level.
Yeah.
So we need to focus on those people, because the top schools, they only take so many students, right? So we need to focus on the lower than the top,
Sure.
but they want to send their kids to the United States. I mean, there's so many opportunities that we can get from those people.
Yeah, I mean, Boston University is not an Ivy League, but it's actually one of the most requested schools from foreign nationals. Based on, because I actually lived in Hanoi, Vietnam for 2 years in 2015 and 2016, so I've met enough recruiters or people that help trained and school and guide and counsel kids in prepping for their college application, and Boston University was like one of their top choices just because of the amount of foreign nationals we have, and then a lot of our, even like smaller schools where you send your kids here for either undergrad or graduate education, then they go back and run the company, things like that. So that's important. Again, not a top school, but people still love it. I think that's the end of our session and timing. Thank you so much for joining us. The panelists will be here if you want to exchange number, get information.